Okay, cool. Good to go. So, first, how are you? How are you doing?
I am well, thank goodness. I think if anything, this crisis has helped us all reorder our priorities. So foremost, I'm well. So far, my family is well. How about yours?
Good. Most of my family's in Southern California. I'm up here. All of my roommates have gone, so that's sort of an added bonus, I suppose. This is strange. Reporting is a social activity, so being cooped up is not great. First thing I wanted to ask you about, can you tell me about what this adjustment has been like for you personally and how your day-to-day has changed?
I've done emergency planning training. In fact, in 2007, I actually did a emergency preparedness for a pandemic. We were talking about the bird flu back in those days. And I realized just how incomplete that was, because we never talked about what it would be like for people to spend weeks working remotely, trying to handle a long-term crisis remotely. So I spend most of my Monday through Friday on Zoom with my colleagues and my CSU colleagues, my chancellor's office, the cabinet, all sorts of people. And I'm holed up here with my husband and my son. My son coincidentally flew in from New York City for the investiture back on March 12th, and he's a software engineer for Instagram, so he'll be here for a very long time. So we're having family dinners at night, and then every morning before there are too many humans out, I try to go for a really long walk in the neighborhood to get some fresh air. So that's how I'm filling the time.
What is it like? I imagine you already spend a lot of time in front of a computer, but what is it like spending, I imagine, a lot more than before?
On the one hand, I'll say overall, I have found Zoom better than I thought. If someone had told me I would have to run a university during a crisis remotely from a laptop, I would have probably told them that's impossible. It's not impossible. I mean, there have been some problems at the beginning, with bandwidth and people were freezing, and every now and then it happens. But in general, Zoom has been better, and you'll chuckle at this. Your phone and your I guess it's my iPad, my phone. They track my downtime, and they sent me a message like 2 weeks ago that I was spending too much time on my devices, and I just laughed out loud. But thank God, I can't imagine what we'd be doing without all this. If we had to do it by phone, it'd be a disaster.
Yeah. We've actually also been trying to look at the analytics of people's phone uses to see how that's changed. So this is a pretty historic time. This is not something that I can remember happening in my time at the university, certainly, and I can't imagine the last time it's happened. That's something I've actually been trying to figure out. Haven't figured it out yet. As someone who I say first and foremost is a historian, and still is a historian, how give some context for this in a greater historical setting, what this moment means?
So I actually have been thinking about it as a historian, and clearly I wasn't here in 1918, the last time the U.S. had a pandemic, but I've been doing a lot of reading about what the U.S. did right and wrong then. And one of the things that they didn't do well was they didn't react quickly like we did this time in San Francisco, to kind of quickly get people physically distanced from one another. So as I read and I'm no expert on the Spanish epidemic or the flu epidemic of 1918, but it was reacting quickly. And one of the things I decided about 4 weeks ago now is that I would rather be accused of overreacting than underreacting. So one other thing I've learned is you have to react quickly. This doesn't wait for you to make long decisions. And the other thing I've been reading a lot about is what you do after the curve starts to go down. And one of the things that I've been reading this past week about the US, and I guess maybe internationally, is that cities that too quickly, or economies that too quickly went back to normal, actually suffered more long-term consequences. Because then you just keep getting waves of the disease. And so, or higher waves. The cities that went back cautiously, kind of a little bit at a time, their economies actually did better. So I actually have been reading it. The thing that I keep thinking about also historically is what happened to generations who went through the Great Depression and the Second World War. And I think that your generation will have skills and reservoirs of fortitude that you will carry forward for the next 4 and 5 decades. And that's what we saw with the Great Depression and the Second World War. So I also think that, first of all, I was a pretty big fan of your generation anyway. I don't buy into that narrative of self-absorbed adolescence or whatever it is, because what I see in San Francisco State students are people who are going to work, they're working, they're going to school, they're helping each other out. So I think it will be, you will be the next great generation because of what you've gone through. So I have been thinking about it historically.
So when we first started talking about this, I mentioned an interview you did with the Business Times, and one of the things you talked about was walks that you used to do around campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard about those. And so obviously now that that's no longer the case, now that campus is essentially abandoned aside from a few essential workers, and students are sort of spread out throughout the country and even throughout the world, how do you get a good gauge of like how the student body is doing or how they're feeling? Who are the people that you talk to most to get a sense of that?
So that would be the student government. So I used to meet with Associated Student Government once a month. We've now made that twice a month. The president of AS and a couple of vice presidents have my cell number, so they can text me anytime they want to or get me on the phone. So I hear a lot through them. I also meet regularly with my colleagues in student affairs. So they're hearing from students. For example, you know, the number of students applying for emergency financial aid, things like that. And then keeping in an ear with the provost on what academic advisors are learning from students. And then trolling social media to see what students are saying there. So, but no, nothing beats walking around. So, but I'm trying to take virtual walks.
What have been some of the most prevalent topics of conversation with regards to associated students and the board members?
They've had lots of good questions and actually lots of good advice. I'm going to give you an example of where the students helped us respond better. This goes way back to the very beginning. I met with them, I don't remember what day it was. Maybe it was Friday. It was right as this was starting. And we were then already saying we may have to move to remote learning. And they were talking about how will you communicate this with students? And they were the ones who said, make sure you use the emergency text system. That we pay attention to. We had been posting things on the web and sending out emails, and it was, they really pushed us to use that emergency text system. So that was the way they were helpful. And then they had questions about refunds, for example. So the first questions I got a lot about were housing refunds. And we quickly got on that, and on a prorated basis, we are refunding students for housing and parking. And then I want to say that it wasn't just our student government, but it was student government across the state, the California State Student Association, CSSA. They played a leadership role in understanding why we are not refunding tuition. Our expectation is that you will all complete your courses this semester remotely. Most of our student support services are available online, from advising and counseling services to telehealth. And so they've played a leadership role in actually explaining that as well. So questions about that. And then a lot of questions about what happens next, or what's June going to look like? What's July going to look like? I get questions about next October. And that's the sad moment where I generally have to say, I don't know. You know, when will shelter in place be lifted? Right now, I think the mayor has it through May 3rd. I expect that she'll extend that. I could be totally wrong, but I think she'll extend it at least through May. But I don't know what June plans. So right now we have made the decision to do summer remote as well. So we just have conversations. And I also think we talk to each other about how things are going. Some, like you, are in apartments they used to share and now they're by themselves. Back home where we're having a conversation and they've got their 7-year-old brother climbing over their shoulders. So we also just do a lot of talking about how we are. Because I think everybody needs a virtual hug right now.
Yeah, definitely. On that subject, you were mentioning Associated Students. The executive director of Associated Students, Tony Sherrill, recently posted something on his Instagram, which I thought was pretty interesting. referenced Maslow's hierarchy of needs, uh, and it was talking about how the current expectations are on the top two levels of, achievement, fulfillment, problem solving. It says, whereas the student body and even some of us, which I imagine he means educators or people within the administration, are here, pointing to the two lowest rungs on the pyramid. So concerns of individual safety, concerns of food security, housing security. How do we and I know a lot of like academia has been on the subject of like continuity and like trying to keep things relatively normal or make that transition seamless. How do you balance trying to keep, the machine chugging along while also trying to accommodate all of the people whose beings are sort of focused on like their more basic needs?
The good news is we're members of a small city or a large village. So I think we have enough eyes to keep our eyes on all of it. So for example, Tony has done a heroic job of keeping Gator groceries going so that students have access to groceries once a week. Jean Schauberg and others in student affairs are keeping access to showers available if students need that for hygiene. In addition, at least two students came to our knowledge who had no home. So we are working on that with them. We've kept our res halls open so that students who can't go anywhere, our international students and others, have a place to live. So I don't think you have to forsake one for the other. I think we have to keep our eye on it all, but not one person does it. So our academic advisors, I hope they're working on making sure that you're making progress to degree. And our basic needs office, Julie and Jean and others, I hope I'm not gonna say hope, because I know these people are all doing this. They're gonna keep their eyes on food insecurities. But then we've done something else. Our students, many of them are employed in food service and in retail. Two of the industries utterly decimated by this. So we have redirected all of our development activities to the Hope Crisis Fund. Within about a week of this crisis starting, one of our alumna, a really just remarkable human being, sent us an unsolicited email saying, I'm giving you $100,000 to help students. We then took all of our resources in development and we're targeting the Hope Crisis Fund. So I can get you some numbers, Juan Carlos, I don't have them right now. So we've done it for about the last week. I heard we had 70 individual contributions, some quite small. It really doesn't matter, right? It's everybody give what you can. But I took a list yesterday at the folks who have donated to date, and I was really impressed at how I saw faculty members, I saw staff members. So we're also trying to raise funds for our students who are going to need emergency financial aid. I'm not a big believer in hierarchies and triangles. I think you build a team and you keep your eye on it all. So what I'm focused on right now is first and foremost, the health and safety of our employees and students. That's why their campus has been largely abandoned. The second thing is academic progress for our students. But to do that, they may need access to emergency funds and housing and food. But then also our faculty and staff. We are blessed right now to work for California State University, so we're getting paid. But this is not easy. People are isolated or they have family members who are ill and losing jobs. So we're trying to we're keeping our eye on the whole thing.
Got it. You mentioned a couple things that are really notable. So one being that Gator Groceries remains open. I know that it was temporarily closed for spring break, but it opened right back up as soon as spring break ended. And that the Mashouf Wellness Center, which is closed, has remained open to allow students to shower on campus. Students don't have access.
I'll get an update on that on Thursday because we were tracking usage. If no one uses it, we would ultimately close it. But I'll find out on or Monique can follow up with Jean to see what the current usage of that is.
I can share right now, Juan Carlos, we've had, I guess it's 2 to 4 students per week using Mashouf for showers. So not a huge number, but it has gotten some use.
Okay, interesting. Okay, the next thing I wanted to ask about, you mentioned refunds, and that's definitely a subject that's been common. Basically, in everyone I've talked to, we created a form for various groups on campus and students on campus to send us questions that they would like us to ask you. And I'm going to say about between 60 and 75% of those were refunded. In case, I'm not sure if you're aware, but one student, even started a petition, a petition titled SFSU Partial Tuition Fees, Reimbursement plus Gym and Outdoor Activities Fees. As of right now, it has a little bit over 4,500 students. So that's about 15% of the student population, assuming that all of the votes or all of the submissions are from students on campus. So you mentioned already that there will be no tuition refund. But there are other fees in question. So just to list a couple of them. So the Wellness Center is $166 a semester. So that's closed aside from the students who are currently accessing it for showers. I think some classes are still going on. Then there's the student health services. You mentioned that online appointments are still available, or phone appointments are still available. That's a $157 fee for the semester. Our GatorPass is a big one because that's specifically a physical thing. So that's $180 a semester. That goes to ASI, I believe. But so there's that. I know because campus shut down, the incentive to come to campus is sort of decreased a lot. And only a couple days ago, Muni announced the closure of a lot of their lines, aside from I think like 14 exceptions. And then so instructional related activities, that collectively is about 118. All in all, it's like $764 in 2 days. Is there a plan for a partial refund of those fees, and if so, how will it be calculated?
So let me tell you how we're distinguishing fees. There are the fees you pay as an individual to get an individual service. So housing and parking, it's one-to-one. Then fees that you pay to support the whole institution, whether or not you use it or not. And I'll give you an example of the Student Health Center and Mashouf. Student pays that, or Muni. We could put that in the same category, but that is an AS fee, so it's a little bit different. But everyone pays regardless of whether or not you use it. That's, I consider, a fee for the social good of the university. So what we're looking at are fees that, it's that one-on-one. I paid this fee in exchange for this direct service. And that's housing, that's parking. We're looking at some of the course fees. Course fees are not so easy because some courses, the students paid the fee and they got the materials at the beginning of the semester, so they have the materials. Others, you paid the course fee and you don't get the materials to the end. So there's a group reviewing those. So we are refunding, or in the process of refunding, things where it's a one-on-one. I'll give you the example of graduation. So that is a one-on-one. You pay a fee and you get your diploma and commencement. So that we are refunding partially, because we do not expect, we will not be able to have, we don't know what we're going to do with commencement yet. I have a work group that includes faculty, staff, and event people to make some recommendations to me. But we do know we will not be able to have an in-person commencement at Oracle Park in 2020. So we've refunded part of that. So I think of it as a fee for direct service rather than a fee that supports everything, like the Mashouf fee. So that's where we are now. And then obviously I stay in contact with the Chancellor's office, who gives us a lot of guidance on this.
So to be clear, the fees that are paid at the beginning of the semester, along with tuition, the Mashouf, GatorPass, which is again AS goes to, and the student health services fee, there's as of right now no plans to for any refunds on those fees.
No.
I also wanted to play you a quick clip, if I can share my screen, of part of my interview with Swan who's the student who started the petition. Do you have any problem hearing it?
I can't hear him.
Sorry.
I can't hear him either.
In the video, sorry you can't hear, I'll make sure to send that over. Swan is talking about international students. He says that a lot of them came over, and that a lot of their, I guess, incentive to come over was the campus environment and the idea of being on campus, and that he feels that part of a refund is necessary because a lot of the physical aspects of it are no longer available. I
think the answer is true, whether you're an international student or a domestic student. First of all, your tuition only covers half the cost of your education. Obviously, international students who are out of state, it's a different situation, but for California state students, the other half comes from the taxpayers of the state of California. So in fact, your tuition alone wouldn't even cover the cost of your instruction. But first and foremost, people come to California State University and they come to San Francisco State to earn a degree. We have heroically moved all of our instruction remotely and almost all of our support services remotely. So yes, will the experience be different than it would have been? Yeah. But will students make progress to degree? Yes. And that's what tuition and most of your fees go to.
Okay. So, and that raises the question, for some of these fees, I imagine that the amount that was being spent on running these programs has also gone down, but the revenue coming in will not change. So will there be has there been any thought into what will be done with that surplus? So for example, the GatorPass, I know that AS is currently in conversations about how to augment their services because they're currently bringing in more revenue than they're spending. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that will only be exacerbated by the fact that students are no longer taking the bus anywhere.
So let me say a couple things. I'll get more detail from the GatorPass, but that's a pass-through. We give that, so we have not been, to my knowledge, the AS has not been, to my knowledge, released of its obligation to pay the city. Mm-hmm. We're still paying that because Muni is still operating. May have been on a reduced service, but I'll talk about the ones that are specifically under us. We are paying our faculty and staff. That's 90% of our budget. There will not be any budget savings as a result of this. We are still paying our people. Our faculty are all being paid. Our staff are being paid. So we're redirecting them. So for example, and we're paying our student employees, by the way. And we have and that's something that AS was really, really adamant about. And we have committed to paying them through the rest of the semester. There won't be savings. We're paying our people. Our budget is almost all people. We have very little budget for other things. And we're still paying our people. What we have been doing is redirecting people. I'll give you some examples. So we have staff who are working from home that had because much of their job was face-to-face, they're doing other things. So they're planning a virtual orientation. We're gonna have to take an in-person event for 8,000 people and figure out how to do it remotely. So they're working on that. The other kind of example is scholarship review. So for example, the staff in my office, they're working with student affairs and financial aid now on scholarship reviews. So everyone's still working and still getting paid, so there will not be savings. And I do think that most of our students, when you can get the number, but I think it's well over 90% of our students are state residents. Your tuition only covers half of the cost of attendance. And right now the taxpayers are still giving us that other half. So there will, and then there are extra expenses from this. So for example, all the technology that we've had to buy, laptops, hotspots, which we've given to students and lecturers and staff, emergency supplies, so the staff on campus have sanitizing projects. We're going to have to pay to sanitize the campus before we reopen. That's $2 million. So there will not be savings here. Maybe a little on electricity.
Got it. So that may be the case for the other fees. I know for the GatorPass fee, a significant portion of it. So you're right that part of it does come from Uni, and they may not have been released from those obligations because they pay. Essentially, they just buy every student a monthly pass for Uni. However, the way it works for BART is it covers one-for-one the discount of every ride. So if someone rides, they don't have to pay any discount. So there they would be a significant increase in the revenue coming in.
So I don't know the details of that. I'm meeting with AS, I think, tomorrow. I'll have them work with the auxiliaries and get numbers. I will tell you that whenever, we have such a thin budget in all cases of the university. We don't project reserves. So our goal is to spend everything we get because we get so little. When at the end of the year, you haven't spent it all, it's called carry forward. And that then becomes your reserve balance. So I'll give you an example. Housing refunded $12 million to students. $12 million. We still have all the staff to pay. Those buildings are still operational. We have several hundred students living in those buildings. So we're not saving any money, but we had to give it back. So the reserves that we have accumulated in previous years are going to go to cover that. And often you can use your reserves to protect employment, which is one of our goals. So, but I'll get more details about the GatorPass. Right now, if I ask the city, for example, we just gave them, I think, $3 or $4 million. We paid our obligation immunity. If I were to ask the mayor right now, are you going to give me back my $3 or $4 million? She would never speak to San Francisco State University again. Because right now, her primary challenge is keeping this city well. So some of this stuff we'll sort out later, downstream, once we have gotten through the health crisis.
Got it. That's understandable. On the subject of, so there's a couple other things that I wanted to ask about. Before, I wanted to talk about housing, since you brought it up. But on the fee side, there's a couple of other small things that I know were already in discussion, associate students. Vice President of Finance, Andrew Carrillo, had been trying previously to get an audit of Category 4 fees specifically. And there's a couple that he brought up, and some of them I think are increasingly relevant now because, for example, with student housing, with a mass refund, has potential for some of these fees to generate more revenue. So just some examples for the university currently has a $20 refund fee, which usually is for students who withdraw from classes. Do you know if that fee is applied to the housing refund?
I don't know. If you want to send me a set of detailed questions about fee by fee, I will have somebody answer it, but okay. I don't have an answer to them.
Okay. Okay, so we can talk about housing. You said that the university refunded $12 million to students who live on campus housing. Do you know how that was calculated? Was it just like for the month of April and May, or how that amount was calculated?
It was prorated. I don't remember if they did it by week or by day, but it was prorated so that they got back the balance for the rest of the semester.
And Juan Carlos, I don't have all those details either, but I know that because each student situation was different, because some people left right away, some people stayed longer and were waiting until the city made their extension of the shelter in place before they really left. So again, it's going to be very case by case.
Got it. Okay. Do you know approximately how many students remain on campus?
Yeah. I'll get an update on Thursday, but as of last week, it was about 700.
700 remaining on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And is that, sorry, go ahead.
Sprinkled across the residents.
And is that number calculated by the number of sets of keys that were turned in? Because I know that was one of the, can you tell me how that was calculated?
A lot of manual labor. People called one by one, the residential life and the housing staff called students one by one. So because we at first thought this was temporary, so a lot of students just left. None of us envisioned what occurred. And for this, I do wish the federal emergency preparedness a bit better, because they left the states handling this. So they left. So what they did was Residence Life and Housing had a list of them all. They divided them up and they started creating categories. Students we know who have left, who have told us. Students we're trying to contact, students who can stay. And then they've asked students to mail back their keys in. But we still have a lot of students whose things are here. So once we get the shelter in place lifted, we're going to have to work through that. So right now, this is literally a manual list. People have called students and said, are you here? Are you there? And then we check them off. That's how.
Do you have an idea of approximately what portion of students who did leave turned their keys in? Because I know that of the students that I talked to, there was some hesitancy to do that.
I would imagine it's not very many, but Monique can follow up with Jenny and find out how many we got back.
And just so I fully understand the question, Juan Carlos, you want to know how many people mailed their keys back?
Or how many people left without turning their keys in?
We may not be able to get keys in. I think the only we'll probably be able to tell you is how many keys got turned back in, and we won't know how. No one's tracking. Did they hand it in person or mail it? So, but we can at least ask how many keys have been turned in.
Okay. So for the students that do remain on campus, I've heard that there's suggestions of consolidating them, and I know one of the more recent, I think the most recent email sent out by David Rourke and Jenny Patino mentioned the potential to consolidate students on campus. Could you tell me a little bit about those conversations and the practicality?
So at the moment, we haven't made any plans to consolidate, but there are a couple of issues that might require we consolidate. The first is, as a state agency, we are under orders to provide mutual aid during a health crisis. So if the city were to come in and need access to some of our facilities, we would be obligated to help them. So if right now we have not been asked, but I know other universities have been asked about using res halls. We have not been asked. I want to make that clear, not been asked. But if we were ever required to use some space, then we might have to consolidate students. The other might be if we get to such a small number on campus that we're worried about health and safety, our ability to secure it. Right now, university police are focusing their efforts on the residential area because that's where we have people. And then the other is, God forbid, this is the shoe I keep waiting to drop. Knock wood, I have not been told we have one confirmed student case of COVID-19. I have been told we have 2 cases, one a faculty member and the other a returning education student who only took courses downtown, an older adult. If we were to get into a situation in which students in the res halls, the remaining ones, started to get it, then we would have to relocate people to keep people isolated and safe. Right now, I have never been more proud of a city, a region, or a university than I am of this one. People are following the damn rules. And because they're following them, I'm not getting record case, soaring numbers of illness. So those are the kinds of things that would precipitate having to consolidate. At the moment, we're nowhere near any of those.
Also, for what it's worth, I believe, the case that I was aware of we weren't informed of it until we had already cleared campus. So the risk of exposure was very minimal.
So yeah, could you tell me a little bit about, I know there's a lot you can't tell me for obvious reasons. What can you tell me about the 2 cases that have been confirmed? The first one was a faculty member, and then you just mentioned the second one of education student.
The first case was fairly early on, and so we were, the Department of Health was still helping us. And so we figured out with them where the faculty member had been, who they had been in contact with, and we contacted the people who come in touch with them and then recommended that they self-quarantine for 2 weeks. Now, the good news I have to say is it's been now 4 weeks since we moved instruction remotely, and it's been 3.5 weeks since we moved the bulk of staff remotely. So I feel, knock wood, thank goodness, that we got out ahead of this for our small community. And we have not seen any spread from within. So far, so good.
Is there any chance you could give me an update on the conditions of the 2 individuals?
I will tell you the good news is, I haven't heard any bad news.
That's good. Yeah. I guess a month ago, which seems like an eternity ago, I ran into you at the opening of Gator Crisis Housing on campus, where in the village, 2 units had been opened up for a total of 16 students or 8? Yeah, 16 students to provide temporary housing. There's a 21-day limit for students who are in an emergency situation where they're suddenly experiencing, where they experience a lack of housing, as sort of a bridge to help them get back on their feet. 3 weeks to have somewhere to stay in the meantime. I believe a few students had already moved in at the start of this. Do you know if any students are currently still in there? Do you know if there's a list of students waiting to get in now?
I had heard, and Monique can follow up with details, she can ask Jean, but we did have one student who very quickly availed themselves of it. And then this started happening, so we temporarily paused the program to figure out what we were doing. And what we've been doing now is when we hear about an individual case, and as far as I know, I've heard about 2 students who needed housing, they work directly with Jean and others in student affairs, and we're trying to accommodate them as we can.
Do you know if there's been any change to the 21-day limit of staying?
Okay, right now it's shelter in place. We're trying to get people to shelter in place. So yeah, no. If we accommodate a student, we will accommodate a student as long as there's shelter in place.
Great. A couple other things. So we have, I guess you'll tell me, 2 new buildings on campus. So there's the housing building directly across from administration and the new Liberal Creative Arts building right across the humanities. So I know that there's been a temporary hold on construction in the city, but I know there are current exemptions. Construction on campus, does that fall into those exemptions, or has that ceased?
I'm going to ask Monique to follow up about the Liberal and Creative Arts building, but the housing is going forward. In fact, just this week, we got notification from the city to continue the housing project, because housing is still considered an essential good. Or I remember the exact legal language, but we do have an exemption for housing. And Monique can follow up with Jason to see what the status of the LCA building is.
Yeah, that's not one I've heard about, so I can find out.
Yeah, I don't know is the answer for the second one, but housing is considered crucial.
So housing is still expected to open at the beginning of fall 2020. Nice.
Yeah, and let's hope we're allowed to be all together and people can move in.
Hopefully, yes, that'd be great. I would really appreciate that. So moving on to more of the academic side of things, there's a lot of changes happening to sort of accommodate members of the community. So a few things that have already been done. The withdrawal deadline has been pushed back. The deadline to make classes credit, no credit has been pushed back. And as far as I'm aware, there's currently moves to push that back even further. I know that the Academic Senate is meeting today. I'm assuming you might be there. And there are currently two proposals that I wanted to ask you about regarding that change. So one of them is being proposed by 6 colleges, their deans and their assistant deans. That's the college's academic policy proposal, or CAP, I suppose. And then the other one being proposed by the Division of Undergraduate Admissions and or Education and Academic Planning, the grading policy resolution. So there's a few differences between those. So CAP, again proposed by 6 colleges, their deans and assistant deans, sets the deadline to change classes to credit, no credit until after students see their final grade, whereas the proposal suggested from the Division of Undergraduate Education sets the deadline to change classes to credit, no credit before finals are taken, or during the last day of instruction, I should be specific. Both extend the deadline for withdrawals until the last day of instruction, so they are the same in that. One place that I thought was interesting in the language was CAP, the proposal from the 6 colleges, asks for a blanket exemption of withdrawal units counting towards like the max, because students have a maximum number of units they can withdraw from. So CAP asks for a blanket exemption of that. The version from the Division of Undergraduate Education and Academic Planning asks students to apply for an exemption and mentions that a blanket exemption could be made, but it doesn't ask for it. And then same thing for repeating classes, with the 6 colleges proposal asks for a blanket exemption. The grading policy resolution asks students to apply for an exemption. The grading policy resolution also asks departments to consider getting rid of finals or lowering their stakes. I wanted to ask if you had a preference or your view on them up until this point. Yeah.
So first and foremost, I'm going to push, and I don't have to push because the faculty has led this. We need to be as flexible as possible and do no harm to students. Hands down, that's our guiding, that's our North Star. Flexibility and do no harm. So it's going to be an interesting meeting. I think both of the policies are in the right direction of being flexible and doing no harm to students. My sense, it's a Democratic floor. I don't know what will happen, but I'm going to support anything that leads us in that direction. Let me talk for a second, though, about withdrawals. One of the things I like about DUAP's notion of applying for it is students are anxious now. Let me rephrase that. Every human being on the planet who's awake and paying attention is anxious right now. When you make decisions in a context of anxiety, you don't always make the right one. So, for example, I could see a student deciding right now to withdraw from a class, when with a little advising and a little support, they could have finished it. So I know one of the things that DUAP is trying to do, working with advisors, is get students to slow down. Before you withdraw from a class, talk to an advisor. You may just need to talk to somebody. I got the nicest email today from a senior telling me she had bumped into me on campus and on a particularly bad day where she was thinking of throwing in the towel. But she stopped me, we talked, we had lunch together, and she sent me an email today that just having a little time with me, she was able to finish the semester. So I think DUAP may be trying to slow people down so they don't make decisions in the anxious moments. I think we're going to end up with the best thing for students, because it does sound like there's largely agreement. I also happen to live with a Cal State Long Beach professor. My husband is a professor of history at Cal State Long Beach, and so I'm actually watching him teach remotely from the other side of the house. And I have been impressed at the extent to which he has worked, and I think this goes for almost all faculty, to figure out how to make sure students get a good enough course, but ease the points of anxiety. So I'm glad our policy will catch up with that approach.
Yeah, so you're definitely right that there are a lot of similarities in the two proposals. The big difference between them is the deadline for when students choose credit, no credit. So again, the 6 colleges cap sets it after students get their final grade. So they can see what their final grade is, and then they can choose based on knowing what their final grade is, whether they choose credit, no credit. Whereas the DUAP one sets it before finals. So could you tell me about the thoughts there?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't spoken to the 2 groups presenting it, but I'll know a lot more by 4 o'clock this afternoon. Yeah, let's see how it goes. My sense is that the faculty are going to lean towards doing whatever's the most flexible for students. But the Senate is a Democratic organization, and I'll let you know around 4 o'clock.
So credit, no credit, or satisfactory, unsatisfactory, which is what your alma mater, Stanford, is doing, has been sort of the general decision for most universities that I've seen. Can you talk about that, and can you talk about the pros and cons of students opting for credit, no credit? Because I know that's one of the biggest questions. Right now.
First of all, I hate the expression unsatisfactory. That is just a terrible. You email them and tell them to change it. No credit is no harm, no foul. I think we're not going to land, as I can tell, with credit, no credit. You can opt for that if you want. I think the better approach is, A through C minus and a no credit. Because there are a lot of students who are going to succeed. Why would we take away the ability of a student who can earn an A to earn an A? Or the student who can earn a B to earn a B? It's really what we're concerned about are the D's and F's. So I think, as I understand it, we're going to discuss that at Senate today too, something that allows a student to earn a passing grade and get that letter grade, good for them. But the no credit would harm the D's and F harmless. So I think that's on the docket for conversation today as well.
So we know that for some students, you're right, if the choice of like universal credit, no credit was applied, that could provide issues for some students, say students who are applying to graduate schools. Could you talk about some students who might want to reconsider applying for credit, no credit, and how that might affect various types of students?
I really do think it's an individual choice, but I would urge the student to speak to an academic advisor. There's so much anxiety and uncertainty now, you need another human being to bounce this off of. And it would be nice if it was someone who understood university policy as opposed to your cousin in Nevada, right? Pick an expert. I think then you make the decision individually. I will say there's a lot of pressure nationally for organizations to relax their rules too. So for example, in the past, I think medical schools didn't accept a credit grade in calculus or something. There's going to be pressure on medical schools to accept a credit for students who took it this semester. So I think you'll see a lot of change. I'll give one example of a change that's really wonderful. Our nursing students who were doing their clinical hours. Our requirement in California has always been that a student needs that no more than 25% of a nursing student's clinical hours could be done through simulation, done remotely. They just changed that to 50%. And that actually is in alignment with the rest of the country. It's not even really a diminishment because other people have done that for a long time. So those are the kinds of changes. This is not just a CSU thing. It's not just the UCs. It's not the community colleges. It's not K through 12. It's not graduate schools. We have to think about this as an educational system. and address all the consequences. I'll give you some other examples. We're going to be much more flexible about the class of the incoming class of 2020, the incoming freshmen of 2020, to fulfilling certain kinds of things. You used to have to get a letter grade in A through G. If you get a credit, good enough. So I think we're going to be doing, we have to think of ourselves as one big ecosystem.
All right, so that I think will be relieving to a lot of students. Another thing that I've heard about, not just at State, but at other places. So for example, Yale, there's a sort of movement at Yale called No Fail Yale, which essentially tries to create a system where students earn A through C letter grades only, and there's not the option to fail. So credit, no credit does avoid students who won't pass their classes from feeling the impact of that on their GPAs. It doesn't prevent the student from not passing the class, prevent the student from having to retake the class. So I talked to Nancy Gerber, who's the chair of the Senate, and she said that there's currently no, or there, from her perspective, she hasn't seen support for a universal passing decision. Have you heard of that at all? And has there been any consideration to adjusting the rubric of grading? So, for example, grades wouldn't be 90 to 100; it would be at a lower bar. Have you had any conversations about that?
So, on an individual course basis, no, because that's up to the purview of the faculty member. You know, what kind of rubric they use, what kind of point system, or the department. I do think Nancy's involved in conversations at a higher policy level about whether or not, instead of having A, B, C, D, and F, there was A, B, C, no credit.
Okay.
When did you speak with her? Because I think they were talking about it over the weekend.
That was I think a week ago.
Yeah, so I think there's been some changes over the weekend. It'll be interesting to see what happens on the Senate floor today. So
you said that that the decision for the exact grading rubric is up to the professor. Has there been any thought to general guidelines or suggestions? I know some of the language inside of the proposals today aren't strict obligatory things, but they're like guidelines for or suggestions for teachers.
So the University Senate can control things like extending deadlines. They could change the grading policy like they're doing. But what university policy can't do is tell Professor Smith in history, at this point in the semester, change how you do things. Instead, it's guiding principles. I will say, for the most part, I have been actually amazed at how quickly faculty move their instruction remotely and relaxed their sense of control. That's maybe not the right way to say it, but opened up the possibility of doing things differently to help students. I do think, like in everything, there'll be a small percentage of faculty who really struggle with this, and there'll be a small percentage of students who really struggle, and everybody else is going to get through it. Okay.
And so what do we say to, however small those percentages may be, of students who will be hit pretty hard by this semester and who may not pass several of their classes and may have to reconsider their entire plans because they might have to take an extra semester?
Reach out to us and we're going to find somebody to help you. I got an email from a student this week who is obviously doing a class remotely, and the faculty member hasn't communicated with him. So I quickly got someone in the provost's office to get in touch with the faculty member. So we've always been frustrated that students don't ask for help as quickly as they should. If there has ever been a moment to ask for help quickly, this is the moment. People are on email all the time. In fact, one of the things that I think I've heard repeatedly from people, and maybe students feel the same, this working remotely thing is a lot of hard work. People are working as hard, if not harder, than they did before. So there's somebody waiting to help a student, an academic advisor, undergraduate education, student affairs, basic needs. There are a whole bunches of people ready to help. So just, if you want to find a way to conclude your article, beg them to ask for help.
Okay, will do. So you mentioned that a small percentage of students and also a small percentage of faculty will be hit particularly hard by this. And I know that some of the moves made in the Academic Senate have not just been aimed at creating accommodations for students, but also for faculty. So some of the things we saw there, an email that Jennifer Summit and Nancy Gerber sent out to faculty on the 17th of last month. The changes is allowing faculty at their discretion to withdraw their student evaluations of teacher effectiveness from their personnel reviews. Could you tell me how impactful those evaluations that students give professors typically are in personnel reviews, and what they typically serve?
When a faculty member is going up for review, it's multiple years. So for example, if you're in your third year, you've got 6 semesters. 1/6 of all of those student evaluations will not change the dynamic. So, and then there are many things that go into a faculty review. So this would only be an issue if it were suspended for years. But if you're going up, for example, by the time you go up for tenure, you have 12 semesters worth of student reviews, student evaluations. 1 out of 12 is not going to change dramatically. And many faculty will continue to use them personally to improve what they're doing.
So can you tell me in a general sense how those evaluations as a whole for all 6 semesters for someone who's in their third year, how they influence or what role they play in the personnel reviews?
I'm going to have to defer that to the provost who does those reviews, but as a former provost, and knowing San Francisco State, we take teaching very seriously. We are first and foremost an undergraduate teaching-focused institution. So we try to attract faculty who want to teach first and foremost, and then we help them become better teachers, and then we evaluate them on teaching. So at a place like San Francisco State, it's taken very seriously. And I want to point out a resource that exists for students, for faculty. Just like we're trying to support students who may find this challenging, our Center for Excellence and Equity in Teaching and Learning, CETL, is a national leader at this, And so they are all over the place trying to help faculty. So we're trying to help everybody do this as well as they can.
One of the other changes that was made there was adding an optional 7th probationary year for faculty who are on a tenure track. Could you tell me about the benefits of opting in for that, and when a faculty member may not need to opt into that?
So there are 3 components to when a faculty member goes up for tenure. Teaching is first and foremost the most important. And then it's research and service to the university. And when you experience a disruption like we're experiencing now, faculty quite rightly prioritize their teaching. They're doing everything they can to create effective learning remotely. That may mean that some faculty have to slow down their research agenda. Or they were supposed to give papers at conferences. All conferences have been canceled. Most have been canceled through the fall. I'm even starting to see cancellations for next October. So that will delay a faculty member's ability to build up the research part of their portfolio. So an extra year gives them a little more time.
Cool. And can you think of an instance of a professor who or a faculty member who may not need to opt into that year and stay on their typical track?
You could have a 5th year assistant professor who's already given half a dozen papers and published a book. So they had already met the standard for tenure in their department. And that's the standard I just gave is not typical. It depends on the department. And they may not want the extra year because they've already done it. So it would be particularly helpful for someone who, for example, if this semester you were going to be giving the paper of your career at the best national conference, and that got postponed a year, you might want to wait a year.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that a lot of the revenue that the university is going to be coming in is not going to be, or the expenses of the university aren't going to be altered much because students are continuing to get paid. And you said the students are continuing to get paid through the end of the semester. For some students, I know aren't on typical schedules that remain the same consistently throughout the semester. They fluctuate from week to week depending on the demands of the department or the availability of the different employees. Do you know how that's being calculated?
It's done unit by unit, supervisor by supervisor, but the general rule of thumb is that students should be paid for the work they would have been expected to do anyway. And one of the things as I look forward to the future, and it'll be months before we see money out of that CARES Act, but a lot of it's going to go to student aid and federal work study. So I'm hopeful that we can just pick back up in the fall with student employment because students will need jobs.
Got it. Okay. So currently the university has a hiring freeze or a hiring pause as a result of what's going on campus. Could you tell me a little bit about the decision there? And I just realized we only have 2 minutes. Monique is saying in the chat. I wanted to ask you about graduation. Beth Helwig sent out a message yesterday talking about a decision surrounding graduation, that commencement has been postponed, and that they're looking into virtual options. Could you tell me a little bit about the conversations there?
So I'll just handle two things. And if we go 2 minutes late, I hope that's okay. Hiring pause. We don't know what our budgets for next year will be. We do not know what our enrollments are going to be. The only thing we have control right now about is what we commit to the future. So we're slowing down what we commit till we know our budgets. Commencement, I have formed a group. It includes 3 members of the Associated Students Executive Board, 2 members of the Academic Senate's Executive Committee, someone from Academic Affairs, and someone from my office, someone from events. It's about 10 people. And they're going to study it and come back with a proposal. All CSU commencements have been postponed across the board. So we need to explore one of 2 options. We just keep postponing it and have a face-to-face eventually, or we do something virtually. So I'm going to wait and see what I hear from them. The one constraining factor here is that the message I'm getting from departments of public health is we would be unlikely to have an event of any considerable size in 2020. So one of the questions that the group is going to wrestle with is, would graduating students rather have a virtual commencement now in 2020, or would they rather wait a full year to have a face-to-face commencement? So we formed a study group, a work group, to give me a proposal.
Great. One of the last things, could you tell me about, if we did have a virtual commencement, have you had any conversations about how that might even function, what the mechanics of that would be?
That's what I formed this group to do. And if this group, in consultation with students, decides it wants to do a virtual, and again, I don't want to presume what they're going to tell me, what they're going to recommend, then I'm going to ask young people who live in virtual worlds. I've seen interesting things that people are doing with Minecraft.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and that's why I have formed a group that is majority or very heavily student, all the members of the class of 2020 to give me advice. So right now, add that to the list of things where I say I don't know, but have asked a group of people to make a good suggestion.
Great. I think we're kind of coming up on the end of our time. Is there anything you wanted to say to students who are confused and just looking for kind of reassurance?
Persevere. Your faculty want you to succeed. The university wants you to succeed. I desperately want them to succeed. So persevere, ask for help. You can do this. And then on a personal note, figure out ways to reduce your anxiety, because the anxiety, and it's not just about school, right? It's about the virus. It's about your family. It's about your communities. Find ways of managing anxiety. Our counseling center is doing tele-appointments. Go for a walk. Serial watch some really bad sitcom. Personally, I want to recommend a Facebook page or an Instagram page. Pluto Living. It's about a little Canadian dog and his advice for how 2-leggeds can survive the COVID. I think he calls it COVIDs. Manage your anxiety, persevere, let us know how we can help.
Is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to let students know, actionable information that I just didn't happen to bring up in my questions?
The health of our community and helping them make degree progress are our most important things. And then I'm here, email me. Ask me questions, I'll find somebody to help you.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're really busy. I had a lot of questions I didn't get to ask. I'm hoping we can get a chance to speak at some point soon.